It was a Thursday evening when I found myself pulling into the Walmart parking lot, a place I usually avoided at all costs. But I had no choice. My boss had dropped a last-minute bombshell about a team meeting the next day, and I needed supplies to prepare. It wasn't like I could show up unprepared, not after the warning he gave me last week. I glanced at my phone, checking the list I'd hastily typed out. Printer ink, notepads, and coffee pods. Simple enough. I tucked the phone into my jacket pocket and sighed. The parking lot was as chaotic as ever. Shopping carts were scattered haphazardly. A group of teenagers were laughing obnoxiously near the entrance, and the flickering overhead light cast long, eerie shadows on the cracked asphalt. A sharp wind bit through my jacket, urging me toward the entrance. I steeled myself and stepped inside, greeted by the familiar hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of disinfectant mixed with something less pleasant. I grabbed a cart and made my way toward the office supplies aisle. Halfway through my list, I felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind you get when you know you're being watched. I glanced up, scanning the aisles, and that's when I saw him. He was tall, bald, and visibly unkempt. His white tank top was stained with what looked like grease, and his jeans were shredded on one side, exposing ashy, scarred skin. But it wasn't just his appearance that sent a chill through me. It was his eyes. Bloodshot and unblinking, they were locked on me with an intensity that made my stomach churn. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he wasn't even looking at me. I forced myself to focus on the shelves, grabbing the notepads I needed. When I looked up again, he was gone. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. As I turned my cart down the next aisle, there he was again. This time closer. He stood at the end of the aisle, partially hidden behind a rack of cleaning supplies. His gaze hadn't wavered. My heart rate spiked. I abandoned my cart and decided to head for the restroom. The growing discomfort in my bladder had become impossible to ignore, and if I was going to confront my unease, I needed to do it without the distraction of physical discomfort. But when I reached the women's restroom, a yellow sign greeted me. Closed for maintenance. Great, I muttered under my breath. My irritation was short-lived, though, as I felt that same prickle of unease crawl up my spine. I turned my head slowly, hoping I was just being paranoid. But no. The man was there again, standing at the far end of the hallway leading to the restrooms. His face was partially obscured by the flickering light, but his stance was unmistakable. His head tilted slightly as though he were studying me. Desperate, I spotted another restroom near the back of the store. I darted toward it, hoping to lose him in the maze of aisles. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as I pushed open the heavy restroom door and slipped inside. The silence was deafening. I hurried into the nearest stall, locking the door behind me. For a moment, I leaned against the cold metal wall, trying to steady my breathing. Everything would be fine, I told myself. He probably wasn't even following me. Then the restroom door creaked open. I froze. Heavy footsteps echoed off the tiled floor, slow and deliberate. I dropped to my knees, peering under the stall. The first thing I saw were boots, battered, scuffed, and caked with dirt. They moved closer, stopping just outside my stall. My breath hitched as I saw his shadow loom under the gap. Is someone there? My voice came out shakier than I'd hoped. No response. I stood up, peeking through the crack between the stall door and the frame. My stomach twisted as I met his gaze. His eye, red-rimmed and foggy, was pressed against the gap, staring at me. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice bouncing off the walls. He didn't move. Instead, a guttural noise rumbled from his throat, low and inhuman. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He slammed his head against the stall door. The sound reverberated through the restroom, each impact louder than the last. I stumbled back, clutching my chest as panic took hold. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" A man's voice cut through the chaos. I heard the restroom door swing open and realized a Walmart employee had come to check on me. "There's a man in here," I cried out, my voice trembling. He's... The employee's footsteps grew closer. "Sir, you need to leave. This is the women's restroom." The man didn't respond. Instead, he let out another guttural growl before slamming his head against the door one final time. The impact was so forceful that the metal door rattled. The employee cursed under his breath. "Hey, get out of here." Within moments, more footsteps entered the restroom, 2 more employees, judging by their voices. Together, they managed to pull the man away from the stall. It took everything I had not to collapse as I heard them wrestle him out of the restroom. He screamed incoherently, thrashing like a wild animal. When the police arrived, they found a small bag of powder in his pocket. One of the officers mentioned something about synthetic drugs, the kind that made people lose control. I didn't stick around to hear more. Even now, the memory lingers. The sound of his head hitting the metal, the look in his foggy eye, they're burned into my mind. I haven't been back to that Walmart since. I can't step into a Walmart without feeling a prickle of anxiety creeping up my spine. The bright fluorescent lights, the scent of cheap plastic and cardboard boxes, and the constant hum of overhead announcements, all of it takes me right back to that day, the day that changed everything. I've never been able to shake the feeling that something sinister lingers in the aisles of every Walmart I walk into. It's like I can still feel the presence of that stranger behind me, hear his footsteps echoing in my mind. It's been years since the incident, but the memory is still as vivid as ever. I was only 8 years old that day, a child blissfully unaware of the danger that could be lurking in the most mundane places. My mom, older sister, and I had made the trek to the local Walmart in Crestwood, a quiet little town nestled deep in the heart of the countryside. It was our ritual, a trip to get ready for the new school year, something we did every August. The day had started like any other. My mom had worked long hours, and after dinner, when the sun began to dip below the horizon, we piled into the old minivan to get some back-to-school shopping done. "Don't forget, we're getting you a new pair of shoes," my mom said, her voice tired but patient. She was the kind of person who could juggle everything, work, home, and still manage to make us feel loved. I was ecstatic. I'd been begging her for a new pair of sneakers for days, and finally she'd agreed. After all, I'd behaved myself at dinner, and she promised I could wear them right out of the store. I remember the excitement as we passed the aisles of colorful shoes, my little feet dancing from one display to another. I got my new shoes, a shiny pair of neon sneakers, and I couldn't wait to wear them. We moved on through the store, my sister ahead of us, chatting away about school supplies, and I felt a surge of pride in my new shoes. As we left the shoe section, I realized one of my laces had come undone. It seemed like such a small thing, a loose lace. It wasn't a big deal, but I called out to my mom anyway. "Mom, wait up, my shoe's untied," I said. She didn't hear me. Neither did my sister. They were lost in conversation, weaving through the aisles, completely unaware of my sudden separation from them. I stopped to tie my shoe, feeling a little frustrated but still too excited to let it ruin my day. I bent down, focusing on the knot, and when I looked up again, they were gone. My heart skipped a beat. I scanned the aisle, but no one was there. The familiar sight of the shoe section now felt foreign, as though the walls had suddenly closed in on me. I called out again, but my voice was swallowed by the noise of distant carts and the overhead announcements. I took a step forward, ready to catch up, but then it happened. I felt it. A presence. Something. Someone. Behind me. Before I could turn around, a hand gripped my shoulder, strong and unyielding. It was so tight, so cold, that I couldn't move. My body stiffened, panic crawling up my spine as I twisted my head to look up. His face was shadowed by the brim of a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He was tall, his gray hoodie sagging loosely around his frame. A scruffy beard shadowed his jawline, and the eerie, unsettling smile on his face was not one of kindness. He didn't look like he was in a hurry. He looked calm. Too calm. My breath caught in my throat. I knew something was wrong. This wasn't someone I knew. This wasn't a family friend, or an uncle, or anyone I'd seen before, and it definitely wasn't a joke. Before I could scream, he jerked me backward, lifting me off the ground as if I weighed nothing. I kicked, I punched, my small fists landing weakly against his chest. I screamed, loud, desperate cries for help. But the man's grip didn't loosen. He didn't flinch. Instead, he just turned toward the exit, walking at a steady pace as though nothing out of the ordinary was happening. "Sorry, he's a bit fussy today," the man said, his voice strangely calm. "Just tired and hungry." His words were so casual, so soothing, as if he were talking to a child who was throwing a tantrum, not to a terrified 8-year-old being dragged away against their will. I glanced around, hoping someone would see what was happening, but the store was full of people moving around like nothing was wrong. They looked away, continuing their shopping as if this was an everyday occurrence. Not one person stopped to ask what was going on. My heart pounded. Panic surged through me. Was this it? Was this really happening? I kept struggling, trying to scream again, but my voice was weak. It felt like everything around me was growing quieter, the store's loud noise fading as if I were in some strange, isolated bubble. The closer we got to the exit, the more hopeless I felt. I was beginning to lose strength and my kicks became slower, more desperate. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a family, a mom and dad with 2 young kids passing by. Something in me sparked. I opened my mouth and let out one final desperate scream. "Help me, please." For a moment, it was like time stopped. The mother's eyes locked on mine and her face twisted in confusion. She pointed, her voice sharp. "What's going on here?" The man seemed to hesitate. His grip loosened just enough for me to break free. I didn't waste a second. I bolted. I ran straight to the family, my heart pounding in my chest. The father immediately stepped in front of me, shielding me from the stranger. The man who had been holding me turned, but before he could react, the father was already chasing after him. The man was fast, vanishing into the crowd, but not fast enough. The father kept up, but by the time he reached the entrance, the stranger had slipped away, disappearing into the night beyond the doors. The family ushered me to the front of the store where my mom stood, her face a mask of panic. When she saw me, her expression shattered. She ran to me, arms wide open. I collapsed into her embrace, tears flooding down my face. I told her everything, about the man, about how he'd tried to take me. The police arrived soon after. They took my statement, but it was clear there wasn't much they could do. The man had vanished without a trace. As far as I know, nothing ever came of it. The days that followed were a blur. I could barely eat, my sleep disrupted by nightmares. My mom, too, had changed. She became more protective, hovering over me in a way I hadn't experienced before. She stopped letting me go anywhere alone. The fear in her eyes when she looked at me was something I'd never seen before, and it terrified me even more than the stranger had. The worst part? The lingering sense that something was still out there. I began to feel it every time we went out. I couldn't shake the fear. Whenever we entered a store, a crowded place, I would constantly look over my shoulder, half expecting to see that man standing in the shadows. His face, that unsettling smile, haunted me. As I grew older, I learned to bury that fear deep inside, but it was always there, simmering beneath the surface. Every time I stepped into a Walmart, that tight, suffocating feeling would wash over me again, as if the memory of that night were alive, waiting to pull me back. I'm an adult now. I've moved away from Crestwood, but the fear never left me. Whenever I walk into a Walmart, I glance over my shoulder just to make sure. I don't know if it's because I never got the closure I needed, or because the event left a scar that will never fade, but that shadow follows me. Sometimes I think about the man, the stranger. What would have happened if the family hadn't intervened? Would I be here today? Would they have found me? Would I have disappeared, just another missing child lost in the sea of nameless faces? I don't know. And maybe I never will. But every time I step into a Walmart, I feel it. The weight of the shadows. The echo of that man's footsteps. the lingering, haunting reminder that danger can be found in the most ordinary of places. It was a typical late afternoon at Walmart, the kind of shift I always dreaded. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air smelled faintly of stale popcorn and cleaning supplies. I wasn't in the best of moods. Pregnancy hormones didn't exactly make it easier to deal with the tired, impatient shoppers, but I was making it through. The due date was creeping up fast, and I just needed a few more shifts to make it through until maternity leave. I was pushing my cart through the aisles, heading toward the baby section to pick up a few things I had forgotten the last time I came in. My hand rested on my stomach as I navigated past the rows of shelves, trying to ignore the dull aches in my lower back. The place was crowded, but nothing out of the ordinary. Just another busy day. But as I passed the electronics aisle, something caught my eye. A man was standing by the DVD section, his posture tense and rigid. He was staring at something in his hands, a thick black object. It didn't seem right. Most people didn't act like that unless something was wrong. I shrugged it off and continued down the aisle, trying not to look too much. I didn't want to get involved. But then the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked back over my shoulder, only to find the man staring directly at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. I felt my heart race. Something wasn't right. I turned quickly and pushed my cart faster toward the baby section, hoping he wouldn't follow me. But the feeling of being watched intensified, and I couldn't get the image of his cold eyes out of my head. It was like the air around me had suddenly gotten heavier, and each step I took felt slower, like I was moving through molasses. I reached the baby aisle, my breath quickening, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. I grabbed some wipes and diapers, my hands trembling slightly as I filled the cart. Just as I was about to turn around, a loud bang echoed through the store. My heart stopped. I froze, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Another bang, then another. I heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering, followed by screams. My hands gripped the edge of the cart, my body frozen in place. People started running, pushing past me in a panicked rush. I looked down the aisle to see people ducking and scrambling for cover. The sounds of shouting and footsteps mixed with the rapid popping of gunshots. I felt my chest tighten as the reality hit me. There was someone with a gun in the store. I glanced down at my stomach. My baby. I needed to protect it. I needed to get out of there. I pushed the cart forward, moving as fast as I could, but my mind raced with thoughts of the gunman. Was he close? Was he coming for me? I turned the corner, but before I could make it any further, I heard a voice. "Hey!" It was a woman's voice, frantic. She was clutching her child and looking over her shoulder, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out, they're shooting." I nodded, my heart pounding in my ears. We started running together, but the store felt like a maze. With every turn, I feared we might run into the shooter. As I reached the exit doors, I could see the security guard, his hand on his radio, shouting orders. I pushed past the panicking customers and ran outside, gasping for air. The cold night hit me like a slap to the face, but I didn't care. I was safe. But something told me that this was just the beginning. The night air was sharp as I stumbled out of the store. The parking lot, usually filled with cars and people going about their business, was eerily quiet. A few distant sirens wailed in the background, but everything felt like a distant echo, as if the world had been momentarily frozen in time. I stood there, trying to steady my breath, clutching my stomach like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I couldn't believe what had just happened. It didn't make sense. I glanced at the other customers who had fled the store with me. Most were pacing nervously, some crying, while others clung to their phones, talking frantically to loved ones. I wanted to call my fiancé, Mark. He worked late shifts at the hospital and usually didn't answer his phone right away, but I needed to hear his voice. My hands shook as I dialed his number, waiting anxiously for the line to pick up. "Hello?" His voice came through, thick with sleep. "Mark, it's me. Something happened at Walmart. There was a shooting. People are freaking out and I don't know what to do. I gasped, my voice trembling. I'm outside, but I can't stay here. It's not safe. Stay where you are. Don't move. I'm on my way. Mark said quickly, his tone turning serious. Are you okay? Is the baby okay? I'm fine. I'm fine. But I need to get out of here, I replied, my chest tightening as I looked around the parking lot again. I couldn't shake the image of the man in the electronics aisle, his eyes on me like he had been waiting for something. I couldn't help but wonder if this was more than just a random attack. I'm coming now, Mark said before hanging up. I stayed on the line, pacing in circles, trying to keep calm. The night seemed to drag on forever. Minutes felt like hours. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen, the gunman, the look in his eyes. What did he want? Was he just a lunatic, or was there something deeper to this? As I was lost in thought, I saw a car pull up, and my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Mark. A man with dark, unkempt hair stepped out, looking around with wild eyes. He was wearing a hoodie, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He glanced at me and then quickly looked away, but something about his demeanor unsettled me. He walked toward the entrance of the store, not in a hurry, but with purpose. Something about him felt wrong. Without thinking, I turned on my heel and started walking toward the back of the parking lot, my hand still clutching my stomach. I had to get away from the store, away from anyone who might be involved. The sound of his footsteps grew fainter, but my instincts told me to keep moving. Suddenly, a loud bang rang out from the direction of the store. I froze. Then came another shot, followed by more. But these shots didn't sound like the chaotic bursts I had heard inside the store. They were slow, precise, like someone was targeting something, or someone. I looked toward the store entrance and saw the man in the hoodie standing by the doors, holding something in his hand. He raised it slowly, and before I could make sense of what was happening, another shot rang out, echoing in the still night air. My heart raced, and I knew this wasn't over. I needed to get out of here. I didn't wait to see if Mark had arrived. I didn't want to risk being caught in the crossfire. My feet moved faster now, driven by a primal fear I couldn't ignore. I wasn't sure if the shots were aimed at me, but they might as well have been. As I neared the edge of the parking lot, I heard a car engine roar to life. A black SUV came speeding toward me, tires screeching. My eyes locked onto the front window, and my blood ran cold. The man in the hoodie was in the passenger seat. The SUV slowed to a stop right beside me, and the window rolled down. A man with a wide, crooked grin leaned out. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, and his eyes gleamed with an unsettling mix of amusement and menace. "You didn't think you'd get away that easily, did you?" he called out, his voice a mixture of sarcasm and danger. "You're carrying more than just life, lady. You're carrying something much more valuable." I froze, trying to make sense of his words, my heart pounding in my chest. The grip on my stomach tightened as if my baby was sensing the danger. Before I could react, the man in the driver's seat slammed on the gas pedal and the car shot forward, narrowly missing me. My legs buckled and I fell to the ground, the world spinning. I couldn't believe it. What had just happened? My phone buzzed in my pocket and I grabbed it, hearing Mark's frantic voice on the other end. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice panicked. "I'm here, where are you?" I'm fine," I gasped, struggling to sit up. But there was a guy, a man in the parking lot, and I looked around again. The SUV had disappeared. "Get to the car now, I'm pulling up," Mark said firmly. "I'm not leaving you there." I stood shakily, my hand still pressed to my stomach. Every part of me screamed to get away, but the truth was, I was already involved in something much bigger than I could have imagined. Whoever those men were, they weren't just random shooters. They had been waiting for me, and they had made it clear I was their target. I rushed to the car as quickly as my pregnant body would allow, my mind racing. The events of the night were spiraling out of control, and I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. Mark's voice still crackled through the phone, but I couldn't focus on it. The only thing that mattered was getting into that car and away from the chaos. The moment I saw Mark's headlights pierce the darkness, a wave of relief washed over me. I hurried to the passenger side and threw open the door. "Get in," he shouted, his eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay? What the hell happened?" I slammed the door behind me, breathless. There were shots. Someone was shooting inside the store, and then this guy. He was after me. I don't know who he was, but... Mark slammed his foot on the accelerator, the car speeding away from the parking lot. I turned my head and glanced over my shoulder, half expecting the black SUV to come barreling after us. But the streets were eerily quiet. "Who were they?" Mark asked, glancing over at me. "Did you see their faces? What do they want from you?" I shook my head, my stomach twisting in fear. "I don't know, but it's not just a random shooting. They were waiting for me. They said I was carrying something valuable." Mark's expression tightened, his grip on the wheel tightening. That's insane." Suddenly, the ringing of my phone cut through the tension, vibrating harshly in my hand. I froze, looking at the screen. It was an unknown number, but something told me I had to pick it up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, in a low, menacing voice, a man spoke. "You thought you got away, didn't you? You're not safe, lady. You'll never be safe until we get what we want." The line went dead. My hand shook as I lowered the phone, my mind racing. "They're still out there," I whispered, the weight of their words pressing down on me. Mark glanced at me quickly. "Who was that? What did they mean?" "I don't know." My voice was hollow. "But they're after me. They're after my baby, and whatever else they think I'm carrying." Mark's jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the road. "We need to go to the police. This is getting out of hand." I nodded, but part of me knew it wouldn't matter. Whoever these people were, they were connected to something bigger, something dangerous, and I wasn't sure we could outrun it. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, heading toward the nearest police station. But just as we approached the intersection near the station, I saw it, the black SUV. It was parked at the corner, its headlights off, waiting in the dark. Mark's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror. Shit. They're following us. My heart slammed against my chest. We were trapped. There was nowhere to run. Mark took a sharp turn, speeding down a side street in a desperate attempt to lose them. But the SUV was relentless, staying right on our tail, its engine roaring louder as it closed the gap. I felt a surge of adrenaline. The fear was overwhelming, but the fight-or-flight instinct kicked in. I glanced at Mark. "We need to lose them. Now." He nodded without saying a word, and with a quick flick of his wrist, he swung the car onto a narrow back road, hoping the turns would give us an edge. The SUV followed, but it was slower, unable to keep up on the winding path. Mark floored the pedal, and for a few heart-stopping minutes it seemed like we might just escape. But just as I thought we were in the clear, the SUV came around the corner, blocking the road. Mark slammed the brakes and I gasped, my hands gripping the seat in panic. The SUV's headlights flooded the car, blinding us. For a moment, I thought we were done for. But then, a figure stepped out of the vehicle, a man in a black hoodie, holding something in his hand. A gun. He pointed it at us, his finger tightening on the trigger. The world seemed to slow as I watched the gun in his hand. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't breathe. "Get out of the car," the man ordered, his voice cold, steady. "You're not going anywhere. Not until you give us what we want." Mark's face twisted in fury. "You want my fiancée? You want my baby? You'll have to kill me first." The man smiled darkly, his finger inching closer to the trigger. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the air, sharp and clear. The man froze, his gaze darting back and forth as the police arrived on the scene. The SUV doors flung open, and several officers with guns drawn rushed toward the car. The man hesitated, then raised his weapon. "Drop the gun," one of the officers shouted, their voice cutting through the tension. The man's grip tightened, but before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out from behind him. He collapsed to the ground and the gun clattered away, sliding across the gravel. "Stay down," the officer shouted as they closed in on him. I breathed a shaky sigh of relief, my body sagging against the seat. The fear that had gripped me just moments ago slowly began to ease, but I knew the nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. Mark looked at me, his face pale but determined. "We're safe. We're okay." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop. They'd come after me, after my baby, and there was no telling what else they would do to get what they wanted. The police finally handcuffed the man and began questioning him. But all I could think about was what the future held. I wasn't just carrying life anymore. I was carrying something more, something they were willing to kill for. And I had no idea how much farther I'd have to run to keep my baby safe. Working at Walmart was usually the calmest part of my day. The routine was comforting, the predictable aisles, the quiet background hum of the fluorescent lights. My apartment, just behind the store, was a stone's throw away, making my daily commute a short, easy walk. I'd grown accustomed to entering and exiting through the back entrance, where I could quickly cross the parking lot, step over a quiet street, and be home within minutes. On most nights, this simple routine felt like the only consistent thing in my life. But one evening, as I was heading into my shift, something strange caught my eye. The loading dock parking lot, usually vacant except for the odd delivery truck, had a dark brown van parked near the dumpsters. It was out of place, too close to the trash bins, and too far from where the trucks normally parked. I could have brushed it off, thinking it was an employee's van, maybe someone running a late shift or taking a break. It wasn't uncommon for people to park there when the lot filled up during peak hours. But for some reason, my stomach twisted. I didn't know why. It was just a van, right? I shook off the feeling, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I walked inside and clocked in, trying to focus on the routine. Customers came and went, and the soft beeps of the scanners filled the air. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted. All I could think about was getting home, taking a hot shower, and sinking into bed. The clock ticked, and I punched out, grabbed my bag, and made my way to the back entrance. I stuck to my usual routine, heading toward the lot, trying not to think about the van. But as I stepped outside, the nagging feeling returned, like a whisper at the back of my mind. I glanced over toward the dumpsters, and the van was still there, parked under the dim glow of the parking lot lights. The area was quiet, no sound, just the hum of the overhead lights. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. I focused on the van, wondering if maybe I had just missed it earlier. Maybe it had been parked there all night. But then, just as I turned to continue walking, I heard it. An engine growling in the distance. It wasn't loud, just a low rumble, but it was getting closer. I froze. The van was moving. I turned my head slowly, my body stiffening as the van rolled toward me, its headlights cutting through the darkness, shining directly into my eyes. I could feel my pulse racing, the hairs on my neck standing up. Was it just a coincidence? Maybe they were just passing through, heading for the exit. But no, the van slowed, rolling closer, stopping just a few feet from me, the headlights blinding. Then the side door of the van slid open with a metal screech that sent chills down my spine. Two figures jumped out, their faces obscured by dark ski masks, their movements fast and efficient. Before I had a chance to react, one of them grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the van. I struggled, instinctively trying to break free, but their grip was like iron. The second man rushed to cover my mouth with a gloved hand. Panic surged inside me as they dragged me toward the open van. I kicked and twisted, trying to scream, but the hand over my mouth stifled the noise. The last thing I saw before the door slammed shut was the dim outline of Walmart fading away, my safety disappearing in the distance. Inside the van, I struggled against their hold, my heart pounding in my chest. I fought with everything I had, desperate to get away, but the men were too strong. Then, without warning, I was slammed in the face with a brutal blow. My vision blurred, and I blinked rapidly, trying to regain focus. When I looked up, my eyes met the cold, unyielding barrel of a gun, the metal gleaming faintly in the van's dim light. My stomach churned. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I was too terrified, too paralyzed by the situation. They spoke to each other in hushed tones, their voices calm, almost casual, an eerie contrast to the terror that gripped me. The language sounded like Portuguese, but I couldn't be sure. The van jolted as it sped away, and I slid helplessly across the floor with each turn. My mind raced, but my body was too weak from the shock to act. The world seemed to spin as I tried to make sense of what was happening, but there was no making sense of it. I was being kidnapped, taken away by two masked strangers, and I had no idea why. Then, just as my mind began to give in to despair, I saw something, a faint glimmer of hope in the chaos. There was no seat behind me, just an empty space, and right there, within reach, was the handle to the rear hatch. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be my chance? I glanced back at my captors, making sure they were distracted. They were still talking, oblivious to my movements. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle. My fingers closed around it, cold and slick with sweat. I took a deep breath, praying they wouldn't notice, and with one swift motion I pulled the handle. The rear hatch burst open with a sudden gust of cold air. Without hesitation, I threw myself out of the van, feeling the wind whip through my hair as the asphalt rushed up to meet me. Pain exploded in my body as I hit the ground, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I had to move faster. Behind me, I heard the van screech to a halt. The doors slammed open. The sound of footsteps pounding against the pavement echoed in the night. They were coming after me. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my legs and the sharp ache in my lungs. My only goal was the safety of Walmart, the lights up ahead. I could barely see them, but I knew the way. I ran faster than I ever had before until I reached the back entrance. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. I collapsed against the cold metal, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. The terror of what had just happened was finally crashing down on me. I dialed 911, my hands trembling so much I could barely hold the phone. When the operator answered, I could hardly speak, my voice trembling as I recounted the events. The police arrived quickly, taking statements and searching the area, but the van and the men were long gone. They suspected the men were part of a larger operation, maybe linked to human trafficking, something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The thought made my stomach turn. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the images of that night. The van, the masked faces, the gun. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched. The parking lot, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like a trap. I avoided it at all costs, never walking alone. I never felt safe. It took weeks before I could walk back into Walmart without my heart racing, without looking over my shoulder every few steps. But I knew I'd never forget the terror of that night, the fear, the helplessness. I was lucky to be alive, but the nightmare never truly ended. I will never be the same. Several months after that terrifying incident with the van, I was back at Walmart. This time, though, I wasn't there to work, but to grab some groceries and hair dye, hoping to relax and treat myself over the weekend. I parked my car under the familiar, dimly lit streetlight in the middle of the lot and felt a strange chill as I exited. But I brushed it off. My experience months ago had left me understandably on edge, yet I reassured myself that tonight was just an ordinary shopping trip. The store was quiet, with only a handful of people wandering the aisles. As I pushed my cart, collecting milk, bread, and a few other essentials, the calm atmosphere lulled me into a false sense of security. After all, it was Walmart, where I'd worked, where I'd walked countless times. It felt safe in its familiarity. When I reached the checkout, ready to pay, I suddenly realized I'd left my purse in the car. "Oh no," I muttered under my breath, annoyed at myself. I turned to the cashier, a young woman with a friendly face, and asked if I could leave my card at the front while I quickly ran outside to grab it. "No problem," she said with a smile. "Thanks," I replied, trying to shake off the weird unease that seemed to settle in my chest. I hurried toward the entrance. As soon as I stepped out, the parking lot felt different, almost eerie under the streetlights. I noticed the vast emptiness stretching around me, the rows of cars that seemed to disappear into the shadows. It was strange how quiet the lot was, like it had been abandoned. I tried to focus on my task and walked briskly toward my car. But then a small glint caught my eye, a slip of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. I stopped, confused, and looked around. But there was no one nearby, just the soft hum of distant traffic. My pulse quickened as I leaned forward to inspect the note. The words "turn around" were scrawled on it in a messy, jagged handwriting. My heart skipped a beat. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, suddenly feeling an icy chill crawl up my spine. I glanced over my shoulder, but the lot was empty. It had to be some prank, right? A sick joke. I shoved the note in my pocket, trying to shake the feeling of dread gnawing at me, and unlocked the door to my car. That's when I felt it, the prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if someone was watching me. My body stiffened. Slowly, I turned my head to glance out the window, and then I saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, was walking quickly toward my car from the shadows. His face was half covered with a dark bandana, but his eyes, they were unmistakable, dark, intense, and locked on me. My pulse spiked. Panic surged through me. I froze for a second, my body caught in some primal flight or fight reaction. He was too close, too fast. Without thinking, I yanked the door shut and hit the lock button, my hands shaking as I fumbled to grab my keys. The man reached my window, and with terrifying speed, he began to tug on the handle, trying to force it open. His face was inches away, eyes dark and relentless as he pressed his face to the glass. His fist thudded against the window, and I could hear the muffled curses as he muttered something I couldn't make out. "Let me in," he growled, his breath fogging up the glass. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, almost too loudly. The noise was relentless, pounding, slamming, again and again. I was trapped, stuck in this car with a man who had no intention of letting me go. I fumbled for my keys, feeling my skin grow cold with fear. Come on," I whispered to myself, my hands finally finding the ignition. I jammed the key into the ignition and cranked the engine, feeling the vibrations of the car's engine roar to life. As soon as it started, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, not looking back as the car jerked forward. But the man wasn't done. I caught a glimpse of him in the side mirror, and he was still coming. His eyes locked on mine as I pressed the gas harder, desperate to get away. I heard him swear, a loud curse that echoed across the parking lot. Then there was a sickening sound, a sharp crack as he swung something toward the window. A rock, or maybe metal. It didn't matter. It didn't stop me. In the split second it took for him to swing it toward the glass, I shifted the car into drive, my foot slamming down on the accelerator. The car surged forward with a jolt, and I felt the momentary tug of his hand being ripped from the door handle. But then, glass exploded inward, scattering shards across the seat and dashboard. My ears rang with the deafening sound of it. The cold air rushed in and I screamed, swerving slightly as the shock of the impact sent waves of panic through me. My foot pressed harder on the gas and the car tore out of the parking lot. I glanced in the side mirror, seeing the dark shape of him running after me, but I couldn't look back any longer. I pushed myself faster, my heart hammering in my chest. I finally reached home, my hands still trembling, my breath short and ragged. I parked in the driveway, and only then did I realize that I was still clutching something in my hand, the note. My hands shook as I unfolded the crumpled paper, staring at those two words again. Turn around. A chill ran down my spine, colder than the night air. The note had been more than a warning. It had been a deliberate lure, a trap to get me out of my car and make me vulnerable. I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me, locking it, double-checking every window, every door. I stood in the middle of the living room, the quiet of my home almost suffocating. The next morning I returned to Walmart with my husband. I had to report what had happened, but more than that, I needed the reassurance that I wasn't alone. Every step into that parking lot brought back flashes of the man's eyes, the sound of the glass shattering, the echo of his fist on my window. Inside, the manager listened to my story, his eyes wide with shock. "We'll look into the footage," he promised, "and we'll make sure our staff stays vigilant. This won't happen again." But there was only so much comfort in his words. The truth was, nothing would erase the terror of that night. Weeks later, I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I passed that lot, a small part of me tensed up. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder or check my surroundings a little more carefully. And the thought of that simple piece of paper, that harmless-looking note, kept me up at night, making me wonder how many others might have fallen for the same trap. From that day forward, I knew one thing for certain. I would never ignore a gut feeling again. I'd been working at Walmart for a few months when I first noticed Mark. He wasn't the type to blend into the background. No, he stuck out in a way that made you uneasy without fully understanding why. Quiet, maybe even a little strange, Mark always seemed to be lurking just at the edges of every conversation. His eyes never quite meeting yours, but always watching, always waiting. At first, I brushed it off. Some people are just odd, right? It wasn't until a week later, when he started asking if I needed a ride home, that I felt a small knot of unease twist in my stomach. "Need a lift?" he'd ask every shift, his voice almost too calm, his offer too eager. I always said no, but it didn't stop him from asking again and again. "It's no trouble," he'd repeat, as if it were some kind of routine he couldn't break. I thought I was being paranoid. It wasn't like he had ever done anything that crossed a line. He never pressured me, never pushed too hard, but that look in his eyes, the way he always lingered too long, had started to get under my skin. Then one evening, my car broke down. I didn't know what to do. I'd have to leave it at the shop, and my usual ride couldn't make it. I had no choice but to ask for help. And of course, that's when Mark was there. Like fate had a twisted sense of humor. "We live near each other anyway," he said with a too wide smile when I hesitated. I should have said no, but I didn't. I was tired, and I needed to get home. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll even buy you dinner. My treat." The car he drove was a beat-up old Honda, the kind that looked like it had seen better days a decade ago. Dents, scratches, like it had been through more than a few accidents. I tried not to think about it, telling myself it was just a car. But when I got in, I noticed something strange. The passenger door had no handle. "Why's it missing?" I asked, already sensing something was off. "It came like that," Mark replied, shrugging. His eyes darted away, like he didn't want to look at me. "Just use the window crank." I forced a laugh, trying to brush off the growing discomfort gnawing at me. I rolled the window up, trying to ignore the icy chill that crept up my spine. This was nothing, I told myself. It was just a ride, just a guy trying to be nice, nothing more. But as we pulled out of the lot, I noticed Mark's hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turning white. The car jerked as he shifted gears, barely paying attention to the road. I tried to make small talk, telling him about the diner down the street where I was planning to buy him dinner, but he didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge me. It was as if I wasn't there at all. The tension in the car grew thick, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The silence was suffocating. Then, without warning, he swerved the car slightly to the right, just enough to make my heart jump into my throat. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Yeah, fine," he muttered. His eyes never left the road, but there was something cold in his tone that sent a chill down my spine. I glanced back at the door handle again, the lack of it suddenly feeling more like a trap than just an oddity. My instincts were screaming at me to get out, but I told myself I was being irrational. "Why don't you fix that door?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Mark's face stiffened. His jaw tightened, and for the first time he looked at me, not with his usual disinterested stare, but with something darker behind his eyes. 3 years, he said, his voice low. 3 years I've been waiting for this. I didn't know what he meant, and for a moment my mind went blank. My gut twisted into knots as I tried to figure out if he was joking or if he'd completely lost it. 3 years? I repeated, forcing the words out. "What are you talking about?" His eyes locked on mine for the first time, and his lips curled into a twisted, unsettling smile. 3 years. Waiting. The words hung in the air, and I could barely breathe. Something inside me told me I needed to get out. Fast. Without thinking, I shifted my body slightly, pretending to adjust my seat. I reached for the window crank again, hoping to get enough of it down to scream if I needed to. But before I could get the window much lower, I felt a sharp pain jab into my side. I looked down, and my heart stopped. He was holding a taser, the prongs pressed against my ribs. I froze, too stunned to react, as he pressed it harder, sending a jolt of pain through my body. My vision blurred and my muscles locked up as the electricity coursed through me. In that moment, I knew I had to act fast, or this ride would be my last. I slumped back into the seat, pretending to go limp. I could feel his gaze on me, and I knew he was watching, waiting to see if I'd stay down. He muttered something to himself, but I couldn't understand it. The only thing I could think about was how I was going to get out of this car alive. When his attention drifted back to the road, I acted. My hand shot to the steering wheel, and I yanked it hard to the left. The car swerved, hitting the guardrail with a deafening crash. Mark screamed, his grip on the wheel momentarily lost. I didn't waste a second. I shoved the door open. His door was still locked, but mine had finally given way, and scrambled over him, kicking him away in my panic. I pushed myself out of the car, stumbling onto the dark road, my heart pounding in my chest. In the distance, headlights appeared, and I waved frantically, praying they would stop. The first car sped past, but the second slowed. The window rolled down and I collapsed in relief, breathless and trembling as I explained everything. The police found Mark at his apartment later that night. His walls were covered in disturbing photographs, some of people he worked with, including me. And in one corner of the room was a picture of me, torn and faded, as though he'd been waiting for this moment for far too long. I still can't shake the feeling that he's out there, somewhere. And every time I see a car with a door handle missing, my heart skips a beat. The clock was ticking down to midnight. A slow Friday night shift at the Walmart in suburban Atlanta. The kind of night you knew would drag on with little to keep you busy. I was just another cashier, clocking in my hours, hoping to make it through without anything crazy happening. But this night felt different from the start. The air was thick, heavy, and something about the way the fluorescent lights buzzed above me felt off. The store had that eerie quiet, the kind where every footstep echoed too loud, too sharp. Then he walked in. He didn't look like much at first, mid-40s, scruffy beard, worn jacket. But something about the way he moved, the way his eyes darted around like he was constantly on edge, it set me on high alert. His gaze flitted around the aisles, never lingering on one thing for too long, always calculating, always watching. He passed my register a couple of times, acting like he was browsing, but I could see him clearly now, moving toward the back corner, eyeing the security cameras. There was something predatory in his steps. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just waiting for the right moment. I tried to shake off the bad feeling, but my gut was telling me this wasn't just another slow night. I watched him for a few more minutes, making a mental note of his position. He was still lurking near the electronics, But now there was a second man who had joined him. This one was younger, maybe in his 30s, wearing a hoodie that hid his face. They exchanged a quick nod, and then they both turned and headed towards the front. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was about to be caught in the middle of something I didn't want any part of. And then it happened. The first man, the scruffy one, walked up to my register. He wasn't carrying much, just a bottle of water, a pack of gum, and a cheap watch. But his body language was all wrong. He was standing too close, his eyes scanning the store behind me, constantly shifting. I forced myself to stay calm, keeping my face neutral. "Everything all right?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I rang up his items. "Yeah," he muttered, not looking at me, just staring at the door like he was expecting someone. "That'll be $7.93, I said, pushing the total across the counter. He pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and handed it to me, his hands shaking. I glanced down at the money, then back up at him. His eyes locked on mine for the first time. There was something cold in them, something dark. "Keep the change," he said quickly, almost too quickly, and before I could respond, he grabbed his stuff and rushed toward the door. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease building in my chest. But then I heard it. Something heavy, something metallic, clinking as it hit the floor just outside the door. The man had dropped something, and I knew instantly it wasn't just a bottle of water or a pack of gum. A gun. I could hear the cold metal clink echo in my head. I froze, heart racing. But before I could react, the door swung open again. This time, the scruffy man wasn't alone. 2 more men followed him in. Both wore masks, both had guns drawn. The temperature in the room dropped. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. "Everyone get down," one of the masked men yelled, his voice muffled. "Don't move." My blood ran cold. My instincts told me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. They herded the few remaining customers to the back of the store, forcing them into the stockroom, away from the security cameras. I tried to stay calm, to think clearly, but something told me this wasn't your average robbery. This was something else. They weren't here for cash, and they weren't here for food. They were here for something worse. The second man, the one who hadn't spoken yet, walked up to me slowly. His eyes were hidden behind the mask, but there was no mistaking the menace in his stance. "Go to the back," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. I nodded, trying to keep my breathing steady as I backed away toward the employee area. But just as I was about to disappear into the hall, I heard it. Another shot, distant but sharp. A customer screamed, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. The men were moving quickly now, setting up something, but I had no idea what. It was like they were preparing for an event. I could hear the rattling of heavy equipment, the metallic clink of something being dragged across the floor. I rushed to the stockroom, where a few employees were hiding. "Get to the back door," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Now." But it was too late. The door slammed open behind me, and the masked men stormed in. They hadn't come for money. They'd come for something much darker. "Stay down," one of them shouted as he grabbed a nearby customer, pulling him roughly to the ground. "Where is it?" I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't care to find out. The only thing I could think of was getting out of there alive. A voice from the back called out, "They've got it. They found it." The masked men turned toward the sound of the voice. I didn't have time to look back, didn't have time to wonder what they had found. I just bolted for the exit. The final transaction had been made, and whatever had gone down in the back was far beyond anything I wanted to be a part of. I made it out barely. The police showed up an hour later, but by then the men were gone. The store was left in disarray, nothing but confusion and unanswered questions. The news reports later claimed it was just a botched robbery, but I knew better. I knew what they had been after wasn't money. It was something far worse, and I knew I'd never be the same after that night. Because whatever they were looking for, whatever they took, it wasn't just a robbery. It was a deal, a final transaction that would haunt me forever. The fluorescent lights flickered above me as I dragged my tired feet through the aisles. It was 11:30 p.m. and I was working the graveyard shift at Walmart, restocking cleaning supplies. I'd been working here for over 3 months, and I was starting to feel the toll of the late hours. The store was eerily quiet, almost too quiet. Only a few scattered customers roamed, barely noticeable in the wide, empty aisles. "Hey, Mark," I called, hoping for a brief distraction. Mark, my coworker, waved from the break room door, looking like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in weeks. I could use a break myself, but I kept pushing through the exhaustion. The night was dragging, and I wanted to get out of there without anything strange happening. But then it started. I noticed her, an old woman standing in front of the cleaning aisle, just staring at the shelves. I'd seen her before, always late at night, always wandering the aisles when no one else was around. But tonight was different. She wasn't just browsing, she was standing still, her eyes wide, glazed over like she was searching for something, or maybe lost in a memory. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked, trying to be polite and get her moving. I wasn't in the mood for any odd encounters. Her head snapped to me with a jolt, and for a second I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. But when our eyes met, there was something wrong. Her eyes weren't just blank, they were empty, like there was nothing behind them. It felt like I wasn't looking at a person anymore. She didn't speak, just stood there, staring. I felt a chill run through me. "Okay," I muttered, stepping back slowly, trying not to show my unease. But the moment I turned, I heard the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps. I glanced over my shoulder. She was gone. One moment she was standing there, and the next she had disappeared. I rubbed my eyes, blaming exhaustion. Maybe I was seeing things, but deep down, I knew it didn't sit right with me. I moved on, trying to focus on my task, but the store felt wrong. The silence was heavier now, as if the walls were closing in. A glance at my phone read 1 a.m. Just me and Mark now. I turned the corner of the aisle and found him leaning against the stockroom door. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. I froze, staring at him in confusion. "Who?" "The old woman," Mark continued, glancing around like he was afraid someone might hear. "She's been coming in for months, but she's not just a customer, she's different. People vanish when she's around. Employees, customers. They don't leave, they just disappear." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "I know it sounds crazy, but you have to believe me. It's not just her. There's something here, something dark." I shook my head, half doubting him, but the way his face had gone pale, the fear in his eyes, it made me second-guess myself. "No way, man. This is just a store. It's nothing, people are just weird, that's all." But as I moved back into the aisles, the store's atmosphere started to shift. The lights flickered and strange noises, footsteps that weren't mine, echoed through the empty aisles. The silence felt like it was pressing in on me. That's when I saw her again. I was passing the home goods aisle when I saw her reflection in the mirror. She was staring at herself, her eyes wide, almost frantic. But something was wrong. The reflection was twisted. Her face was contorted with fear, her hands pressed against the glass, as if she were trying to break free from something. I blinked. Twice. But when I looked back, she was gone. Again. Panic gripped me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't make sense of it. My heart was racing, my thoughts jumbled. I needed to find Mark again. I found him in the stockroom, pacing nervously. "I saw her," I blurted out. "Her reflection. It wasn't her. Something was wrong with it. What the hell is going on?" Mark didn't look surprised, he just nodded slowly. "I told you, man. It's not just her. There's something else in this store. Something dark. People don't leave. They just disappear." He paused. "And when you start seeing it, you can't stop." A wave of dread washed over me. I needed to get out, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something was pulling me in. I had to know more. I spent the next hour trying to push the feeling away, but every corner I turned, it felt like I was being watched. I could hear whispers in the aisles, but when I turned, no one was there. It was 3 a.m. now. Then I saw her again, standing outside the front doors. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. This time her eyes were different, frantic, desperate. She looked like she was trying to escape something, but she couldn't. I stepped outside cautiously, pushing the door open just a crack. She didn't flinch, didn't move. She just stared back at me, her eyes filled with something dark, something that made my blood run cold. And then, without a word, she turned and began walking away. But she wasn't walking into the night. No, she was walking toward the parking lot. And then, she didn't stop. She kept walking until she disappeared into the ground. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak. What the hell just happened? But that wasn't the worst part. I turned to go back inside, but my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Mark. Don't look at the ground too closely. It'll pull you under, just like the others. My heart skipped a beat. As I looked down at the pavement beneath me, the ground rippled, just like the earth had swallowed her. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, my stomach dropping into my feet, but there was no one there. I ran back inside, the feeling of being watched never leaving me. I couldn't shake the thought, had she really gone? Or was she still here, trapped? And if she was, what was she waiting for? I never worked the graveyard shift again, but every time I passed that Walmart, I couldn't help but glance at the parking lot. And sometimes I swear I still see her there, watching. I was exhausted. My back ached, and my feet felt like they were made of lead. 7 months pregnant, I'd been working the night shift at Walmart for over a year now, trying to save enough for the baby and make it through this stage of my life. The quiet of the store should have been comforting, but tonight it felt eerie. I, Nina, stood behind the register, scanning items for the few tired customers who barely seemed to notice me. I hated working late, especially in this massive store that felt like a cavern of emptiness after midnight. The overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch on forever, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I saw him, a man, early 30s, dressed in dark clothes with a hood pulled low over his face. He lingered near the aisles, moving slowly, as if he were waiting for something. At first, I didn't think much of it, but my gut twisted. Something about him felt wrong. My eyes kept drifting back to him, and every time he was looking right at me. The store was almost empty now. Only a few stragglers wandered the aisles. I tried to focus on my job, but every time I glanced up, his gaze was fixed on me, cold, calculating, like he was weighing something. His eyes made my skin crawl, but I couldn't look away. Then, without warning, he disappeared down one of the aisles. A slight relief washed over me, but it didn't last. The feeling of dread settled in my stomach like a stone, heavier than my swollen belly. My thoughts raced. I needed to focus, to push it aside. But something told me this wasn't over. I decided to check the back room for some supplies, hoping the routine would help ground me. The flickering lights made the store feel even more oppressive, so I grabbed a flashlight. As I walked down the narrow aisles, every creak of the floorboards seemed louder than usual. The stillness was suffocating, as though the store itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. It was him. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his voice low and grating, like it belonged to someone who had long forgotten how to speak kindly. Before I could scream, another man appeared beside him, bigger, taller, his cruel smile stretching unnaturally across his face. He grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the back of the store. "Please don't hurt me," I begged, my voice shaking. "I'm pregnant. Please, I can't." The bigger man's eyes softened for just a second, but then he shoved me harder. Move. The panic hit me full force. I was alone, defenseless, and they had guns. My pregnancy felt like both a weakness and a shield. I was vulnerable, but I had to hope that would mean something to them. Maybe I could stall, find a way to buy some time. But the reality settled in. I wasn't going to get out of this unless I thought of something, fast. We reached the employee break room, and the flickering lights seemed to dim even more, casting everything in a shadowy haze. The tension in the air thickened, like a storm was about to break. One of the men pulled out a duffel bag. "We need you to open the back storage doors," he demanded, his voice tight with impatience. I froze. "I don't have the keys," I said, barely able to hold my breath in. "I can't open that without a manager." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "You work here, don't you? You know how to get us what we want." I couldn't understand what they were after. What could be so important that they needed to break into a back storage room? My thoughts spun wildly as I tried to keep them talking, to keep them from getting any closer to whatever it was they wanted. I need a manager's permission," I stammered. "I don't have the codes. You'll need someone else to open it." His grip on my arm tightened, almost making me cry out. "You think we care about your excuses?" he spat, voice dripping with disgust. "You know exactly what we need. Open the door." I could feel my heart slamming in my chest, every beat echoing like a countdown. What was happening? Who were these men? Then, just as everything seemed on the verge of breaking, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the store. The blaring alarm followed instantly, and the men froze, their faces draining of color. "What the hell did you do?" the bigger man hissed, looking toward the back of the store. His grip on me loosened slightly, and for the first time, there was something like fear in his eyes. I didn't know what had happened, but it was clear that something had gone wrong. My chance. I wasn't waiting around to find out. I ran. My heart pounded as I bolted down the aisles, adrenaline surging through me. I reached the front of the store, saw the flash of blue lights outside the window, and heard the sound of police radios crackling. I screamed as loudly as I could, pointing toward the back of the store. "They're in the back," I yelled, voice cracking with fear. An officer rushed inside, gun drawn, and I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and ran for the exit, not caring if I was seen or heard. I just needed to get out. The officers stormed in, their footsteps pounding in the silence, and the men were quickly surrounded. The first man, the one in the hoodie, started backing toward the exit, but it was too late. They were trapped. The men were arrested, their hands cuffed, faces twisted in disbelief. But as I watched them being led out of the store, the man in the hoodie turned to me, his expression cold and empty. "You think this is over?" he muttered, voice low and dangerous. This was just the beginning. A chill ran through me. The words made my stomach turn. What did he mean? This wasn't just a random robbery. These men had been after something bigger, something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The store was in chaos now, officers everywhere, and the aftermath of the break-in still unfolding. I was shaken, but I was alive. As I sat in the break room, trying to steady my breathing, my mind kept circling back to what the man had said. What had they been after? The officers eventually let me go home. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit my face, and I realized that nothing would ever be the same. That quiet store where I had spent so many sleepless nights would never be the same, and neither would I. Walmart at night had a strange kind of stillness. It wasn't peaceful, far from it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie, pale glow over the aisles, and the occasional beeping of the self-checkout machines added to the artificial hum. But after working here for 3 years, I'd grown used to it. That Tuesday night in Phoenix, Arizona, though, had a different vibe. The air felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. It was nearing midnight, the usual dead zone. Most of the customers who came in this late were either drunk, desperate for something, or just plain weird. I was stationed at self-checkout, my least favorite spot. The cameras watched everything, and I had to deal with people who were either too impatient to follow instructions or trying to scam the system. "Hey, Maddie," Emily said, walking over from her register. She looked exhausted, her blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail. "You think they'll let us out early tonight? It's dead in here." I glanced at the clock. "Doubt it. They'll probably find some stupid cleanup job to keep us busy." Emily groaned. "I swear, if one more drunk guy comes in smelling like piss, I'm quitting." We both laughed, but it was cut short by the sharp ding of the sliding doors. A man walked in wearing a red hoodie, the hood pulled up despite the warm night. He moved slowly, his hands stuffed into his pockets, and kept glancing over his shoulder. "Great," Emily muttered. "Looks like trouble already." I didn't respond, but I kept an eye on him as he wandered toward the frozen food section. Something about him felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. About 15 minutes later, the first real problem of the night rolled in. "Excuse me." A shrill voice cut through the quiet. I turned to see a woman, maybe in her late 40s, standing at one of the self-checkout stations. Her cart was overflowing with junk food, toilet paper, and cleaning supplies. She jabbed at the screen, her face flushed with irritation. "This damn machine isn't working," she barked. I forced a smile and walked over. "What seems to be the issue?" "It keeps saying item not recognized. I'm scanning it right." I looked at the screen. Sure enough, the machine was throwing an error. "Let me fix that for you." She stepped aside with a huff, muttering under her breath. "Figures. This place is useless." I scanned the barcode manually, and the machine finally cooperated. "Thanks for your patience," I said, handing her the receipt. "Yeah, whatever," she snapped, grabbing her bags and storming out. As I walked back to my station, I noticed the guy in the red hoodie again. He was now near the electronics section, pacing back and forth. His hands were still in his pockets, and he kept glancing toward the front of the store. "Emily," I whispered, leaning toward her register. "You see that guy in the hoodie?" She looked up from her phone and followed my gaze. "Yeah. What's his deal?" "I don't know, but he's been acting weird since he walked in." "You think he's gonna steal something?" "Maybe. Keep an eye on him." Emily nodded, her eyes narrowing as she watched him. That's when the crash came. A loud bang echoed from the electronics section, followed by the sound of glass shattering. My stomach dropped. "What the fuck was that?" Emily whispered, her face pale. "Stay here," I said, my voice shaking. I walked toward the noise, my heart pounding in my chest. The electronics section was empty, but one of the display cases had been smashed. Shards of glass littered the floor, and the air smelled faintly of metal. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I took a step closer, my sneakers crunching on the glass. That's when I saw him, the man in the red hoodie, standing at the far end of the aisle. He was holding something in his right hand, and his face was partially obscured by the hood. "Sir?" I said cautiously. "Are you okay?" He didn't move. "Sir, I need you to..." Before I could finish, he turned and bolted toward the front of the store. "Shit!" I yelled, running after him. "Security!" I shouted as I passed the registers. Our security guard, an older guy named Ron, stepped out from behind the customer service desk. But before he could react, another man, a greasy-haired guy I hadn't noticed before, stepped into Red Hoodie's path. Everything happened so fast. The greasy-haired guy shoved Red Hoodie, sending him sprawling to the ground. That's when I saw it. The object in Red Hoodie's hand was a gun. It clattered to the floor, sliding across the tiles. For a moment, everything froze. Emily screamed. Customers ducked behind counters. My legs felt like lead. The greasy-haired guy dove for the gun, but Red Hoodie was faster. He grabbed it and pointed it at him, his hands shaking. "Stay the fuck back," Red Hoodie shouted. I was just trying to help." the greasy-haired guy said, his voice shaking. "You don't want to hurt anyone," I called out, hoping to de-escalate the situation. "Just put the gun down." But Red Hoodie's eyes were wild. It was clear he wasn't thinking clearly. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "I just needed the money. They said I could get out of this mess, but it's all falling apart." I looked at him carefully. He was young, maybe early 20s, and his desperation was palpable. A broken man caught in the middle of something much bigger than he could handle. I could almost hear the weight of his failure, his crumbling life. He glanced at me then, his eyes wide, and I saw the fear in them. "Just let it go," I said softly, taking a small step forward. He shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm not going to make it out, am I?" he whispered, almost to himself. Before I could respond, the greasy-haired guy lunged at him. "No!" I screamed, but it was too late. The gun went off with a deafening crack and everything turned to chaos. The greasy-haired man collapsed to the ground, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped through his fingers. Customers screamed and scattered, running for the exits. Red Hoodie looked as shocked as the rest of us, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the man he'd just shot. "Oh fuck," he whispered, stumbling back. "Oh fuck, oh fuck." Before he could react further, Ron, our security guard, tackled him from behind. The gun clattered to the floor again, spinning out of reach. Ron wrestled Red Hoodie to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. "Stay down, kid," Ron growled, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. I ran to the greasy-haired man who was writhing on the floor, his face pale. "Someone grab a first aid kit," I yelled, pressing my hands against his wound to stop the bleeding. I was just trying to help," he mumbled, his voice weak. "You did," I said, my voice shaking. "You just hang on, okay? The cops are on their way." The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights illuminating the front of the store. Paramedics rushed in to treat the greasy-haired man, while officers hauled Red Hoodie to his feet and cuffed him. He didn't resist, he just kept muttering to himself, his eyes glazed over. I sat on the floor near the registers, my hands still stained with blood. Emily came over and sat next to me, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said truthfully. The store was quiet again, but it wasn't the same as before. The tension in the air had been replaced by something darker, something that would linger long after the broken glass was swept up and the bloodstains were scrubbed away. As I clocked out that night, the paramedics wheeling the greasy-haired man past me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just survived something I wasn't supposed to. I drove home in silence, the events of the night replaying in my mind. The sound of the gunshot echoed in my ears, and every time I blinked, I saw the blood pooling on the floor. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the darkened windows of my house. Somewhere out there, Red Hoodie was sitting in a jail cell, and the greasy-haired guy was fighting for his life in a hospital bed. And me? I was alive. But as I looked at my hands, still faintly stained red despite the scrubbing, I wondered if I'd ever feel normal again. Because sometimes when you make it to the final checkout, you leave a part of yourself behind. Lena wasn't the type to get rattled easily. Working the night shift at Walmart had its own rhythm. Quiet, monotonous, just the way she liked it. She'd grown used to the cold glow of fluorescent lights, the hum of the air conditioning, and the gentle squeak of her cart as she moved down empty aisles. But tonight felt different. It started when she found the cart. Just an empty shopping cart, left abandoned in the middle of the aisle. She was about to push it to the front when she noticed something odd. The cart wasn't the usual kind. This one had a peculiar, worn look. Its wheels squeaked with a sound that made her skin crawl, and the handles were chipped, as if someone had gripped them too hard over the years. Shrugging it off as another forgotten cart, she pushed it back to the front of the store. But when she turned the corner to stock the next aisle, there it was again, sitting right in front of the shelves, as if it had never moved at all. "That's strange," she muttered to herself, a flicker of unease creeping in. She moved the cart again, but the moment her back was turned, it appeared once more in a different aisle. Her heart skipped a beat. It had to be a coincidence. She had to be imagining it. But it didn't feel like one. Lena tried to shake off the feeling. It was just the late shift getting to her. She had been working overtime lately, and the isolation was starting to mess with her head. Still, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder as she walked. Every time, the cart seemed to be waiting for her. Her mind began to wander. She thought about the old stories she'd heard about this Walmart. It wasn't an old building by any means, but there were rumors. Some said that a worker had died here years ago, Greg. Lena had never really believed in the ghost stories, but she couldn't help thinking about him tonight. They said it was an accident. He was found dead in the back storage room, but there were whispers. People said his death wasn't so accidental. Some even claimed that he'd been pushed. Lena brushed the thoughts aside. "It's just a story," she told herself. But then the lights flickered. Once, twice. The air grew colder. She was getting paranoid. She knew it. But when the cart appeared yet again, this time, right in the middle of the aisle where she had just been, Lena's heartbeat quickened. This wasn't normal. "Okay, I'm done," she whispered under her breath, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to herself or to whatever presence had been following her. It was almost as if the store itself was alive, watching, waiting. "Lena, you all right?" The voice cut through the tension. It was Linda, the night supervisor. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the palpable fear hanging in the air. Lena nodded, though her voice faltered. "Yeah, just a little tired, I guess." Linda didn't seem convinced. She stepped closer, eyeing the cart. Her gaze darkened, and for the first time, Lena saw something in her eyes. Something familiar, almost a recognition. "You're seeing it too, aren't you?" Linda asked softly, her voice tinged with fear. Lena's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Linda glanced around the store as if to make sure no one was listening. "You think this place is just a normal Walmart, don't you?" she said, her tone almost bitter. "But it's not. There's a history here. A man, Greg, he worked here, died here. But it wasn't an accident, Lena." Lena frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Linda leaned in closer, her voice now barely a whisper. "He was pushed. They found him in the back stockroom, lifeless, but that's not all. Some people say he's still here, that his spirit is tied to something unfinished. And that cart, it's connected to him." Lena shook her head. "I don't believe in that kind of stuff." But as the words left her mouth, she heard it, the faint sound of breathing. Slow, steady, but growing louder. She spun around, but no one was there. "I told you," Linda said quietly. "You're not the first to see it. That cart appears when the store is empty, when the quiet sets in. It's a reminder that Greg never left. He's here, watching us, waiting for something to be finished. And that cart, well, it's his way of telling us." Lena stood frozen, the weight of Linda's words pressing down on her. The lights flickered again, this time the air growing unbearably cold. Lena could feel her breath visible in the air, though the temperature hadn't dropped. She had to get out. But the moment she turned to walk away, the cart appeared again, right in front of her, as if it had always been there. "Finish it." The whisper came again. It wasn't Linda. It wasn't anyone. It was the cart, and it was Greg's voice, distant and urgent. Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't just walk away. The tension in the air was suffocating, the whispers louder now. "Finish it." What did it mean? "Lena, don't..." Linda started, but Lena didn't hear her. She was already walking toward the cart. She couldn't stop herself. The cart stood still, waiting, silent. Then, With a force that felt like the world collapsing, everything went black. The door to the store slammed shut behind her and the cart disappeared. Just like that. When Lena finally returned the next day for her shift, the cart was gone. The store was quiet. It felt almost too normal. But the air was still heavy, thick with the same oppressive feeling from the night before. And when Lena passed the aisle where the cart had been, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for her again. Finish it. The next night, Lena returned to work, her heart heavy with the weight of what had happened. The store was quieter than usual, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above her. She walked to the front where the registers were empty and then stopped dead in her tracks. There, in the middle of the aisle, was the cart, waiting for her. Her breath hitched in her chest as memories from the night before rushed back. She remembered Linda's warning, the way the air had grown thick with dread, and the whispers that had followed her every step. But tonight was different. Lena stood frozen, staring at the cart. This time she wasn't afraid. No, this time there was a strange sense of understanding. She knew what had to be done. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the cart. The wheels squeaked as she pushed it slowly, the sound reverberating in the silence of the store. She could feel the presence, the oppressive weight of Greg's unfinished business. She didn't know what had happened to him, what tragedy had bound him to this place, but she was determined to end it. She pushed the cart all the way to the back of the store, to the area where Greg had died. The lights flickered as she stood there, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The silence was suffocating. "This is for you, Greg," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. Suddenly, the store seemed to exhale. The temperature dropped, the air thick with an invisible force. The cart shook, rattling violently for a moment before the wheels locked. Then, a cold breeze swept through the aisle, and for a split second, Lena felt a presence behind her. She didn't turn around. "Finish it," came the whisper, but it wasn't Greg's voice this time. It was softer, distant. Lena reached down, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the cart. The moment her hand made contact, the entire store seemed to groan in unison, the lights flickering one last time before stabilizing. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, the cart rolled backward on its own, moving away from her, as if it were being pulled by invisible hands. The temperature returned to normal. The store felt different, calmer, emptier, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Lena stood still, the silence now comforting instead of suffocating. She felt a sense of release, as though she had done what was needed. The whispers faded, and for the first time in days, she could breathe. As she turned to walk away, she glanced at the aisle one last time. The cart was gone. The store was quiet. It was over. But as she left the building that night, Lena couldn't help but feel that Greg's spirit had finally found peace. The oppressive feeling had lifted, and though she didn't know what had truly happened, she knew one thing for certain: she would never forget the abandoned cart that had haunted her nights. And as she locked the door behind her, she heard one final whisper. The fluorescent lights hummed above, flickering intermittently in the quiet, sterile aisles of Walmart. It was late, far past midnight, and the store felt like a hollow shell. Only a few souls roamed the aisles, mostly workers stocking shelves or tired shoppers who had no place else to be. I was one of those workers, clocked in for the graveyard shift. The paycheck was decent, but the loneliness of it all was starting to get to me. The radio blared the same damn pop song again, looping endlessly like a broken record. I hated it. I'd heard that song 1,000 times, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt like a cruel reminder that time had no meaning here. That's when he walked in. At first, I barely noticed him, just another late-night shopper. He had that scruffy, out-of-place look, like someone who had been up for days. A dirt-streaked baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, a heavy coat that probably hadn't seen a wash in weeks, and the kind of boots that screamed, "I'm not here to shop." He didn't grab a cart. He didn't browse. He just walked and walked, over and over, pacing the aisles. I started to feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I couldn't pinpoint why. I tried to ignore him, kept stocking the shelves with a practiced ease. But it wasn't long before his presence became unbearable. Every time I turned a corner, there he was, lurking in the shadows, pretending to shop, but his eyes never left me. When I caught him watching me, he'd smile, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was unsettling. A grin that seemed to stretch a little too wide. I tried to dismiss it, maybe it was nothing. But as the night dragged on, the store became emptier. My shift was nearing its end, and I thought maybe I was just overthinking things. But then he did something that made my stomach churn. Out of nowhere, he blew me a kiss. That's when I knew. This wasn't just some random weirdo. This man was dangerous. I called my manager, Tom, as discreetly as I could, but his response did nothing to ease my anxiety. Just keep an eye on him. I'll come out soon. Soon? It felt like an eternity, and the man seemed to grow bolder with every passing minute. He wasn't just following me with his eyes anymore. He was following me, physically. Whenever I turned a corner, he was there, just a few steps behind, always pretending to examine the shelves. But I knew better. I could feel the weight of his gaze like an invisible chain, pulling me closer to something dark. When I checked the clock, I thought I saw a flicker of hope. My shift was nearly over. I grabbed my jacket and walked toward the employee exit, relief flooding over me. But as soon as I stepped outside, it evaporated. There he was, leaning against an old truck, parked just beyond the reach of the flickering streetlights. His eyes glinted in the dim light, his smile even wider than before. A sickening feeling twisted in my gut. "Hey there, sweetheart," he called, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Need a ride home? It's late, it's not safe out here." I froze. The calmness in his voice was terrifying. I shook my head, my throat dry, barely able to croak out a response. "I have a ride. I'm good." My legs felt like lead as I turned to walk back inside, but before I could move, a voice cut through the air like a lifeline. Sarah? Claire? My best friend. She had come to pick me up, like she did every night. She was parked across the lot watching us, her eyes locked on the situation. I didn't need to look back at the man to know he was still there, his eyes boring into me. I hurried to the car, my heart thundering in my chest. Claire didn't wait for me to explain. She started the engine and pulled away before I could even close the door. For a brief moment, I thought we were safe. I let out a shaky breath, but just as I glanced into the rearview mirror, my blood went cold. His truck. It was behind us, tucked into the shadows of the road, his headlights dimmed. My heart slammed in my chest. How had he followed us? He couldn't have known where we were going. Claire saw the panic in my face, but there was nothing she could do. She drove faster and I kept glancing back, half expecting to see his headlights growing closer. But the road behind us stayed empty. My nerves were still on edge, but the terror began to fade, replaced by exhaustion. When we reached my place, I hurried inside, still unable to shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. I turned to wave at Claire, but before I could even close the door, a shadow caught my eye. His truck, parked just down the block, barely visible in the darkness between the trees. How had he gotten here so fast? I locked the door and grabbed my phone, hands shaking uncontrollably as I dialed 911. The officers arrived within minutes, but when they questioned him, he just smiled. He acted like he had every right to be there, like nothing was out of place. The police told him to leave, but I knew the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next day, I found out that the man had a criminal history, a pattern of stalking women in the dead of night. He'd been banned from Walmart months ago, but it didn't stop him from coming back. The police couldn't do anything. The damage had been done. Every creak of the house, every shadow at the window kept me on edge. I couldn't help but wonder, Was he watching me? Was he still out there? I was terrified to even leave the house, and that night I made a promise to myself. I'd never let my guard down again. Claire would pick me up every night from now on. I would never walk to my car alone, because no matter how many times I looked over my shoulder, no matter how many locks I added to the door, I knew deep down that the man was still out there, watching, waiting, and one day, he'd come for me. The next day I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle outside my window, every sound in the house sent my heart into overdrive. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, checking my phone for messages, wondering if he was out there. But I couldn't keep living like this, paranoid and anxious, letting him control my every thought. So I made a plan. I told Claire what had happened, and we decided to take action. We went to the police together. I gave them everything I knew about the man. The truck, his face, the details of the night he'd followed me. They took it seriously this time, especially after I told them about his history. A few days later, I saw him again. He was standing near the gas station just down the street from my house. But this time something was different. The police were already there, circling around him, keeping their distance, but making it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. He saw me too, his eyes narrowing, his grin flickering for a second. But then, as they cuffed him and led him to the patrol car, he didn't say a word. No smirking, no taunting, just silence. I thought I'd feel relief. Maybe I did, but it was strange. The fear, while muted, was still there, sitting quietly in the back of my mind. But for the first time in days, I could breathe easier. As the car drove away, I stood on my porch, staring after him, knowing that he wouldn't be coming back. At least not anytime soon. But deep down, I knew this. Safety was never guaranteed. People like him, they don't just disappear. They're always lurking, waiting. And as much as I wanted to forget the last few weeks, I knew that nothing could ever feel quite the same again. I never thought much about the nights I spent at Walmart. At 19, the long shifts in the fluorescent-lit aisles were nothing more than a way to make ends meet. Extra cash for my truck, my video games, and maybe some food from the fast food joints near work. I wasn't looking for anything more than the simplicity of paycheck-to-paycheck living, surrounded by the hum of the conveyor belts, the shuffle of shoes on linoleum, and the occasional uncomfortable exchange with a customer. But the night everything changed started like any other. I had just clocked in for my 10 p.m. shift. The store was eerily quiet, save for the steady clinking of shopping carts and the sound of cleaning supplies being restocked in the back aisle. Ethan, the supervisor, gave me a quick nod as I grabbed my cleaning supplies. He was always around late, a guy who seemed as tired as I felt. He gave me a list of things to do, mostly routine, boring tasks to keep me busy. It didn't help that the night was frigid, the kind of cold that settled deep into your bones, even inside a warm building like Walmart. The air outside was thick with a mist that clung to everything, making the parking lot appear like something out of a horror movie. Still, I didn't think much of it. I was used to the late-night shifts, the empty aisles, the stale air. Around 3 a.m., after completing the monotonous tasks, I was finally free to take a break. I made my way out to the parking lot, wanting to get some fresh air. The lot was mostly empty, with a few cars parked in distant corners. I parked my truck in the farthest spot, as per company policy, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, scrolling through my phone, mindlessly avoiding the dark thoughts of how I was blowing through my savings on tires that weren't cheap. That's when I saw him. A figure, tall and ragged, leaning against the side of my truck. His clothes were tattered, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. At first, I thought it might have been a coworker, maybe one of the night shift stalkers getting off work. But something felt wrong. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me as I approached. I stopped, my gut twisting, a sense of dread crawling up my spine. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound confident. "Can I help you?" The figure slowly turned. What I saw made my stomach lurch. The face, Sunken eyes, pale skin, lips twisted into a grin that looked more like a snarl, was not human. It was as if he had stepped straight out of a nightmare, his skin pulled tight over his bones like a mask. There was no warmth in his eyes, no humanity, just cold, dead space. "Sorry," he said, his voice low, almost in a whisper. "I just wanted to talk." "Get away from my truck," I said, my voice shaking, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why I felt so scared. Maybe it was the way he spoke, or the fact that he hadn't moved a muscle in the minutes we'd been standing there. His presence was suffocating, and I felt trapped. The figure stepped back slowly, and I felt a flicker of relief, but then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You're not the one I want," he murmured, his eyes flicking to the side. "But you're the one I'm getting." Before I could react, he vanished into the fog like a shadow melting into the night. I stood frozen for a moment, the words echoing in my mind. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my palms were slick with sweat. I didn't want to leave the safety of my truck, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I glanced around, scanning the parking lot, but everything was still. I slammed the truck into gear and pulled out, the tires screeching against the pavement as I sped toward the exit, the mist swirling around my headlights. That was when I saw him again. He wasn't standing in front of the store, or lurking by the cart corral like I'd imagined. He was right behind me, running in the fog, faster than any man should have been able to. His figure loomed closer in my rearview mirror, the faint outline of his face illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights. I could feel the panic rising, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I swerved, trying to outrun him. I floored the gas pedal, tearing through the parking lot, but the figure was gaining on me. His eyes, those cold, lifeless eyes, were locked on me, and his grin grew wider with every step. I shot through the intersection, my heart hammering in my chest. The lights changed, but I didn't care. I heard the unmistakable thud of footsteps pounding the pavement behind me, too close for comfort. There was no way he could be that fast. My foot slammed on the gas pedal harder, and I felt the truck lurch forward as I flew down the street, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I was miles from Walmart, my hand still shaking, my pulse erratic. It wasn't until I pulled over to call the police that I realized something horrifying. The fog had swallowed the night. No cars, no movement, just the faint outline of Walmart sitting in the distance like a ghost town. And I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there. The police came, but there was no trace of the man. They searched the area, but no one had seen him. No one had heard anything. It was as if he'd never existed at all. But I know what I saw. The look in his eyes, that chilling grin, the way he moved like he was from another world. It was real. And every time I walk out of Walmart at night, I can still feel his presence, lingering in the fog, watching from the shadows.